gentlemen, welcome to GameSpot's main event. We're here at 3rd Street Gym in San Francisco, California to bring you the history of boxing video games. From Tyson to Holyfield, Ring King to Knockout Kings, they're all in here. And later, Fight Night creator Kudo Tsunoda will take you on an in-depth look at the latest and greatest scrapper for the Xbox 360, Fight Night Round 3. Now, GameSpot editors, to your corners, and make like Little Mac and come out swinging.
Well, boxing for Atari 2600 was probably the first boxing video game ever.
It's hard to even call them boxing games. I mean, those games back then were just like, groupings of pixels that they extended, a little bit and struck each other.
I can't ever believe we ever thought that, wow, this is really great boxing action, because, that's stupid.
It wasn't until the Nintendo Entertainment System came around that we really first saw games that had not only some of the fighters that we knew in the ring, but also some of the technique that they use in real life. Some people might try to tell you that Mike Tyson's Punch-Out isn't an important boxing game in the history of boxing games, but really what it did was it actually kind of introduced everybody to a boxing video game that you didn't have to like boxing to love.
It was a fun, pattern-based arcade game that was really easy to get into.
You had this little dude, and he, his name was Little Mac.
He literally had to jump up to hit people. What stood out about Mike Tyson's Punch-Out was its cast of characters. You had Great Tiger, who had a jewel in his turban, and he would teleport all crazy and stop and try and punch you. Bald Bull, who's kind of the iconic lead character for the whole Punch-Out series. So the other big deal about Mike Tyson's Punch-Out is, of course, it had Mike Tyson in it as the game's final fighter. And he basically served as the boss for the whole game, and rightfully so, because Mike was a bad dude, man.
Like, you saw him come out of the ring and you were terrified. Just like probably everybody else who faced Tyson in 1989.
You didn't beat Mike Tyson the first time you got to him. You were like, what? That was like a 4-second fight the first time you got there, but you could eventually beat Mike Tyson, something DJ Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince were never able to do. Ring King was a game that started out in arcades and was eventually also brought home to the NES.
But Ring King was the one that actually let you move around the ring.
But your movement was really kind of relative to the other fighter, so you could circle around the other fighter and kind of move in and out, and that let you play some range games where you could be able to walk in, throw a punch, and get out.
But it did have, the light, quick punches, and then the heavy blows that would, even sometimes knock the guy across the ring. So Ring King had a lot of style to it.
Like, everybody had an afro. I don't care what race you were, you had an afro.
Ring King was just kind of crazy all around. Between rounds, it had these little animations with guys in the corner kind of helping you out.
And they'd be like doing something, and you could, what? What's happening there? What? So yeah, so we get a dude from on the phone, Data East, explain what that is exactly. That'd be awesome.
Ring King. Yeah, I think that was one of those games that we played, and it was just like, not a lot of good mechanics in there for us to draw, and I think that was one of the ones that was more of like, yeah, it gave us lots of good things to not do as opposed to stuff we're trying to get into Fight Night.
.40 boxing significance in the history of boxing games is a big one, actually. They wanted to make it so that the fighters in the ring moved as realistic as they possibly did, and they did that by using polygonal fighters. They wanted those fighters to move around the ring. They wanted to give those fighters all the realistic punches that we have today, the hooks, uppercuts, body shots, all that. And they wanted to really kind of give you the feeling as though you were in the ring. And so one of the ways that they did that was they included tons of multiple camera views, including a first-person view.
That core concept of, the view in 4D boxing, that really was something that stuck in the back of our mind. That was something we wanted to bring to the Fight Night series.
It allowed you to kind of see the action, up close and personal. And so 4D boxing had a lot of firsts. It was also one of the first games that allowed you to train.
I thought out of all of them, 4D boxing was one of the ones that we enjoyed the most.
On the Sega Genesis, coming into the 16-bit era of gaming, there were a ton of boxing games. Of course, there was none that was more notable than Evander Holyfield's Real Deal Boxing. The thing that they added was, though, that you actually could, you could duck, you could, raise your torso. the thing that Evander Holyfield kind of set the standard for was all the stuff that kind of came in around before the fights and after the fights, specifically the training. Evander Holyfield was one of the first that stood out, and one of the ones that would certainly be mimicked by a lot of different titles for years to come. Champions Forever, the TurboGrafx-16, probably one of my all-time favorite games. First off, you've got the presentation. The game starts up and you've got that rockin' beat. You know, box, how hard can you hit? Ding ding.
Box, how hard can you hit?
You know, it's like, that song all by itself was like, I'm sold. But then you get in the game and you could pick, you know, 3 generic fighters to play as that you could actually take through a career. And that was the most exciting thing. It was the first time that you ever got a fighter in the ring for money. In Champions Forever, you didn't win the title and then game over, you know, roll the credits. It was you won the title, and just like in real life, then you had to defend it. The gameplay in Champions Forever, that was, you know, one of the big hooks. You could actually move your guy. It was just this one little square that you moved around, but it let you throw those punches in there, and that was all you needed, and it was cool. And since those buttons were analog back then, it knew, like, pretty much how far you were pushing that button. So if you pushed it a little bit, you know, it would just throw, you know, this little, like, half a jab out there, you know. If you held it down, he would stick his arm out, and you just hold it there. It was the first game that actually lets you throw a jab out there, catch the guy with it, and kind of, you know, stun him, and then throw a right behind it, you know, throw a hook, uppercut, body shot. There were so many different levels of Champions Forever. Was cool, and the gameplay was certainly one of the biggest.
Kudo Ali. So that was a big 3DO console game.
You had Frazier, you had Holmes, you had all these guys in there, and they would give you kind of like a little bit of the history of why they're foes of Ali. You know, a little bit of the backstory as to the fights that they had. They finally said, you know what, there's an experience with boxing that is you know, on so many different levels. Let's try to do it. Let's try to give it to them. So one of the ways that they did it specifically was they gave you a view. They gave you tons of different camera views. One of them was straight like broadcast, along with the announcing of a true announcer. And that was, you know, it was like, what? It was like, you're what? Their first-person mode even went a step further, and it had all kinds of crazy stuff, like you'd see your hands and you'd throw those punches, and not only that, but when you would catch, you know, your opponent, and you catch him with a good punch, you could see the damage on his face. You could see it actually physically there. Foes of Ali really did come closer to being as realistic of a simulation of the sport of boxing than any other game had come at that point, and it was one that certainly would last for a while and would be something that all the games that we're playing today drew on. So here you had Ready to Rumble. You had all these crazy guys in it.
It sort of harkened back to the old Punch-Out days where you had really cartoony characters.
I think that was the best thing about Ready to Rumble, was that you really got a sense of who the characters were, their personalities, and then they did a good job of making the way that those guys fought, you know, match their styles.
You had like Afro Thunder and Boris Nakhimov, I think it was, and Jet Chin and those guys. Afro Thunder was all about, you know, rope-a-dope, and Jet Chin had his sort of martial arts influence style.
Obviously, it's a lot more arcadey, you know, so a lot more over-the-top kind of, you know, not true to the sport of boxing.
Let 2 of you in here.
Out of everything, something we drew from Ready to Rumble was the importance of defining those characters and having the characters match their styles.
The way it did the, you know, the motion where you could actually move around and, like, you know, guard and do it like you do in Fight Night today. That was the first time I think people had looked at it and saw that you could do something with that analog controller other than just moving your guy around the ring. And it gave you that motion, you know. It was, you could really stick and move, and you could move out of the way, and you could guard, and you could do a lot of things in that game that you just didn't have the control to do in other games before it. Victorious Boxers was the last lesson before we got to Fight Night.
For one thing, the game didn't have any life bars, no health meters or anything like that. Guys would get tired in the later rounds, and it just felt like a real step forward for boxing games.
And Victorious Boxers was one of the first games that actually started to get a little better boxer control.
You could have it so that when you played the game, you would use the analog stick, and you would use it not only to move your fighter around the ring, but if you just pushed it a little bit, he would instead do the, you know, the upper body torso movement.
And they started to get some kind of good defensive controls, some good leaning, you know, that you could do with your character.